Hey everybody, today I'm joined by Marcus Baskerville for a conversation to discuss all the delicious food he's posted on Facebook. Okay, just kidding. So today we're going to talk about wood, barrel, and time, his new book, The Art of Barrel Aging. Marcus, I imagine most people are familiar with you, you're in your impact in the industry, but if they were meeting you for the first time in an elevator, how would you introduce yourself?
That's an interesting question. I'm always trying to be incognito because I'm very much the introvert. So more than likely, I would probably try to act like I'm busy on my phone. But if they had actually engaged me, I would probably just say, my name, I'm Marcus Baskerville, and probably leave it at that. Because if I say anything more, then it's gonna spark additional conversation.
That is very true, and you don't have a lot of time in the elevator to not awkwardly have a conversation.
All
Let's put it
right.
that way. Well, you just put out the book Wood, Barrel, and Time. So I'm really curious. You've done a lot in the beer industry, but how did this
hmm
book even come to be?
Well, you know, we've always kind of been known for our barrel age projects, at least locally at first, right? But then you look at where the trajectory of my career went, that was always what I was passionate about was barrel aging, those type of projects and working with our barrel program. And so dealing with wood barrel and time, it was kind of one of those things where what really resonated from was when I was at the Florida Craft Brewers Guild annual conference, and I sat and listened to a, a conversation about barrel aging, and I remember asking a very specific question about, especially being in Florida, how they utilize the actual weather temperature as far as their barrel aging process. And out of the group of four people talking, only one person was able to give me the information that I was looking for to see if they were going to bring that up. And only one person was able to bring that information up. And it resonated with me then, like, there's not really a lot of information out about barrel aging, and a lot of times, unless you're like in specific groups, like unless you're in the side project group or the Firestone Walker group of brewers, or the J Wakefield group of brewers and Moxa and Goal and all of that type of stuff, you're losing a lot of, and Bottle Logic, you're losing a lot of those information because they're not sharing it unless you're like within those circles, right? And so, being said that, I've been able to garner a lot of information over the course of the years. One, from experience, but then two, collaborations, working with other people, research, and all of that fun stuff. And so, you see a lot of resources in wine, you see a lot of resources in spirit for barrel aging, but we don't have anything in beer. And so I said, well, guess it's time to slide something in so we can at least have a basis of information that some are aware of and some might know some of it, but here's a kind of crash course on barrel aging.
So before we dive in, there's two things that I'm interested to hear from you. First off, when did you first, discover your love of barrel aging, Marcus?
That would be back in 2010, and I was at a because I so backtrack a little bit, I was never much of a stout fan. Growing up, when I got into beer, I was very much brown ales, pale ales. I didn't gravitate towards IPAs until a couple years later. But one thing, and I was like, I don't want a thick, dark beer that tastes like molasses and dark fruit and all of these flavors that I particularly didn't want in my beer at that time. But then I had Parabola for the first time. But then also looking back then, the 50/50 series too was prevalent in Sacramento. And I remember having a couple of those different beers, but specifically Parabola. And I was like, this is the most amazing beer I've ever had in my life. And I remember then saying that once I got into brewing, like I knew that barrel aging was the main thing that I wanted to be great at.
And for you how did you learn how to barrel age? Was it trial and error? Did you have mentors you sought out information from? Where did
So
you gain all that knowledge?
yeah, some trial and error for sure. So I was barrel aging as a home brewer, taking little 5-gallon whiskey barrels and putting them in my closet. Um, but then also, I've had the course of being able to learn from some great individuals when it comes to barrel aging. First looking at Mike Miraz from Miraz Brewing up in El Dorado Hills, California. He wasn't getting into stouts and porters and all of those type of things, but his sour program was amazing. And then once I moved to Texas, being able to experience Jester King and seeing the passion and focus that went into their barrel program, even though you were dealing with mixed fermentation, like the quality of barrel program that they have is completely unmatched. And so being able to have those different type of experiences definitely led me on the course of wanting to create good barrel aged beer. But then also I think it's the competitive spirit. For me, like I had the honor of meeting Corey from Side Project a few weeks ago, about a month ago. But one of the things that I told him was having, like, I was already creating barrel aged beers, but having Mom on for the first time was when I was like, man, I need to step
One of
my
my favorite beers.
man,
Oh my
like,
God.
man, I need to step my game up, right? Like, or even having BBT, like, I need to step my game up. Like, his barrel game, and also doing a couple collaborations with Derek from Goal over the course of the last few years, has definitely put my like competitive spirit in, where it's like you have to step your game up because there's people that are brewing and creating some of the best barrel aged projects that you've ever had in life. And if you want to be a part of those little names, like you're gonna have to step it up. So learning little intricacies from individuals over the course of years, but then a lot of the kind of trial and error has went into it as well to develop your own kind of vibe behind it. You don't want to mimic or copy anybody, but you sometimes you do want to have that reverence and pay tribute, but then also still have your own vibe to what you're creating.
So you're learning from all these people. You've got this competitive spirit, but times have changed since you first had that first barrel aged beer that made a difference on your life. And we see lots of articles and data. It's kind of talk about that barrel aged beers, they're down a little bit. Like, what's your take on this, Marcus? Can barrel aged beer, when well done, of course, still be a way to stand out in today's market?
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of it goes into the marketing effect of it. For me, like for instance, I just did a dinner for the Osteoporosis Association last week. They had their annual conference here in San Antonio. I sat with one of the ladies at a table for another dinner that I was a part of about a year ago, and so she reached out wanting me to do their dessert pairing. But she specifically wanted a barrel aged beer. And before that, she didn't drink beer or enjoy the experience of beer. But upon the conversation that I always bring up about beer is you can't really say you don't like beer. There's so many different styles, so many different types, so many different subcategories that you just haven't found one that you enjoy yet. But then I also think that dealing with particularly barrel aged beer, a lot of people don't understand the overall process, time, and dedication that goes into these beers. Like I tell them from the jump, like some of the stouts that I've created, have sat longer than your favorite wines. Like it's the overall process that goes into it that brings the passion and the flavor and all of those things that you were looking for within this product, right? So for me, it was a lot of extended aging because you're one mellowing out the hotness from the barrel, but then you're bringing other prevalent flavors out, like more of the dark fruit, more of the caramel, more of the vanillins and things along those lines. And so when you're able to describe these intricacies of the beer to your customer base and they not had these experiences before, now you're bringing in something brand new light to them where they're like, wow, I need to go and seek this out, or I need to experience this again. But dealing with kind of the craft beer industry, we don't get into the heavy marketing effects of trying to differentiate or trying to express ourselves differently from something else, right? You look at an IPA can, it's always refreshing, hoppy, juicy. Like those are always the descriptions on the can, right? If I see that on every single can, why am I gonna go out of my way to try your product or this product or that product? If as a consumer, if I'm not in the know, I'm gonna assume all of these taste the same. So, being said that, I think we have to be a little more expressive and passionate in our overall effects of marketing of what we're giving about those particular beers. And I felt like dealing with some of these events that I've been a part of as of recently, I've been able to express and do that. And it's brought kind of a new light to me as far as what needs to be done for these to be successful. But then also, we look at kind of the packaging. That's another issue. Nobody wants to sit there and like, even for me, I open a barrel aged stout. I'm not drinking a 16-ounce stout to myself. I'm gonna open the bottle. I might drink half of it and then recap it. Most consumers aren't gonna recap it, and so you're losing half of a product by the next day because it's oxidized and lost your carbonation in it, and it doesn't taste the same. Well, going into a smaller format. One of the things that I did specifically before I left Weather Souls is we started going into following like Revolutions. They do an amazing job at it. Is the smaller can format for their barrel aged beers.
I love
I
it.
can have one, enjoy it. If I'm not feeling too woozy yet, I might enjoy another one or even a half and give the other 6 ounces to the wife, however the case may be. But it's an easier follow than the 16-ounce format, the 22-ounce format, and these things that we've been doing before. The consumers are changing, so as a industry, we need to adapt and change with them.
No, I love that. I love seeing those barrel aged beers in the smaller, serving sizes because, back in the day when you could only get them in like 750 mils, and if you were the only one drinking it, it's not necessarily the ideal experience.
Man, I was just talking to a friend not too long ago, and when the brewery was super popping, we had a share, and it was three of us, and we had a Black Tuesday, whatever the Wednesday was, and a Thursday, and then another Black Tuesday. So it was three of us with four of those big ass bottles, and we finished all four of them, like every single ounce. And the two of them went home, and I remember like I was done for, and I woke up the next day, and I was just like, I don't even know how these people make it home, or even like, oh man. So yes, at this point, like smaller format is definitely the way to go, especially if you're doing something solo.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, you have to be so intentional with it, and there's something special about that intimacy when you're talking to someone about the beer, whether it's a guest or a friend, and sharing that experience together.
Exactly.
I mean, that moment is truly what it's all about.
Yep. It's been interesting because I have gravitated much towards like customer experience and hospitality, especially after the James Beard nomination, and I'm doing all of these upscale dinners and fine dining dinners and things like that. And the way that they particularly operate to provide information to their guests is a lot different than what I've experienced in the craft beer world. And I find that I enjoy the finer dining, high class customer experience more than I enjoy the normal craft beer experience at this point.
I mean, it's crazy to look at, let's say, the past even 8 years of our industry. 8 years ago, it was almost if you brew it, they will come mentality that worked for so many of the people out there.
Exactly.
Then we slowly saw the shift towards more experiential type, tap rooms, just brands, which I love. But for someone and myself who I speak so much about that customer experience, I truly wasn't using the word hospitality as much as I should have. But you just nailed it. That is what our industry is right now. Because when our competition isn't just big beer, it isn't just another brewery, it's every place someone's going to do something and spend money. You have to have that
Exactly.
insane level of hospitality.
Exactly. People are looking to consolidate the time that they spend out and the money that they spend. And especially if you look at consumers where it's more than one of them, they might only go one place now for the entire weekend instead of hitting up 2, 3, 4, 5 places like we used to. I know I even do that for myself. So being said that, we need to be something that sets ourselves apart where this customer is going to continually come back. And unfortunately, at this point, there's so many options for beer because I mean, we are becoming a sense of saturation that I have so many options for beer at this point that okay, yes, I might enjoy your brewery, but the brewery that is closer and I don't have to waste as much gas has similar product or beer and their experience is the same. So well, I'm going to go to the closer brewery because I'm saving on gas and saving on money and all of these things. And so I think we have to expand our kind of thought process on how we need to generate and or continue our customer bases.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, we mentioned people potentially going to breweries a little bit less, and I imagine you've gone a little bit less lately as you wrote this book that we're about to dive into. I've always admired people so much who take the time to write a book, and it probably is on my list of things I would like to do in my life. But talk to me about the process. Once you went to that Florida Guild conference and you're like, you know what, I'm going to write this book. How did you start? Like, how did you stay organized? How did you stay focused? Just give me that rundown.
Yeah. So, being said that, I've had a lot of extra time on my hands. The job market has not been that great lately, and it's like you apply for stuff, and it's like 100 applicants on this particular job have viewed or applied for it. And so I've had some additional time on my hands outside of doing the consulting and speeches and stuff like that. And so, honestly, I didn't, like I've been engaged in things and obviously been trying to do the necessary things to provide for my family. But I also didn't want them to think like, oh, this fool's just taking an extended vacation. He's just kind of just sitting around, like, like the wife is like, our bank account's not looking the same, and all those type of things. And even though a book's not going to make you a ton of money, it's one of those things where I got to put my passion into something and then I got to engage and take time and focus. There were days that I found myself literally sitting at this desk right now for 14 hours, like non-stop. Get up, use the bathroom type of thing, might go grab an apple or something, but literally. And then you're looking at the time and it's like, damn, I got in this chair at 7:30 and it's 9 o'clock at night. And she's like, oh, you need to rest your brain. I have a headache, but I need to finish this chapter because you're already so deeply focused on what you're doing. I was like, I told her I felt like I was on Adderall.
I mean, the Florida Brewers Guild event wasn't terribly long ago.
No, it's about what, a month and a half ago or so.
So wait, pause for a second.
About a month.
You wrote a book in a month and a half.
Yeah, I mean, it was so. This was the whole thing about the book. When I wrote out the outline originally, I was only planning like a 60, 70 page book. Like that's all I wanted. It was supposed to be like a quick read, like super quick read. Hey, these are the basis of this. This is kind of the historical data. These are the steps to make a fine barrel-aged beer. But then as I hit the outline, started the introduction, I found myself like, oh, I forgot to add this. Oh, I forgot to add that. Oh, maybe I should talk about the humidity and the differences of that because that's something that you utilize. Or, oh, maybe I should talk about. And it just went and went and went. And then even then, like, I think I posted the first little screenshot of the cover. And then somebody asked me on Instagram, was like, did you ask about this? Or did you cover this? And I was like, wait a second. No, I didn't. And I probably should. So then I had to go in and re-edit the whole book because at that point it was done. I think I ended up making like 4 edits to it just based off of, oh man, I got to add this. So then it was like, even talking to my brother, he was like, how long is it at this point? I was like, man, the last time he was like, it was like 70 pages. I said, like, yeah, now it's like 140. And I didn't plan on it being that way, but I just got so engulfed. And the particular subject is so natural for me that it wasn't hard to articulate or write the book, and I still kept it pretty simple. So my plan is to actually come out with a hard copy at some point. I kind of wanted to fill the market because obviously this is my first book. I've never wrote anything. I haven't wrote anything extended or that long since college, and that was 2006, 2007. So one, I kind of wanted to feel the waters to see how people would gravitate towards it, the publishing process, all of those type of things. But then still put something out of quality that either a home brewer could utilize, or even a brewer who's not that knowledgeable in the home brewing could take this, or professional brewing could take this, utilize it, and come up with a barrel program. Now, being said that, I think the total time it took me to write this book was about 3.5 weeks. And then with the edits, it was about another week and a half or so.
First off, that's
So,
insanely impressive. So proud of you for doing it, getting out to
but
the
it's
world.
not
And
like
you
I have a nine to
self-published.
five. It's not like I have a 9 to 5 right now. Like, I treated it as my 9 to 5. So was literally getting up in the morning, dealing with the kids, and then, all right, I'm diving in, spending this much time today on this subject or this subject, and then kind of, going from there. And then, obviously shooting a couple outlines to friends and stuff like that. Hey, review this, let me know if I need to add anything additional, and then just going from there. Now, the plan is to do like a more extended copy, because even then, after I released this one, I was like, man, I didn't talk about liquid density and anything like that, and it's those things matter as well. But then also I had the fun idea, like I was talking to M, and I was like, it would be dope to have you do all of the, because I didn't include any artwork. And so it was like one of those things, like we'll do like a hardback copy, expand on some of the subjects, add a couple more subjects, and then I'm gonna have M do all of the artwork for it with like a couple infographics, demographics, things like that to kind of enhance the book. But that would be something I work on in a month or two or so, and then maybe try to involve the DA this time around to kind of expand on the actual subject and see if we can create something that will be, the actual, this is the book when it comes to barrel aging beer. That's going to be the overall goal.
Very cool. In addition to the hardbound copy, can you do like an exclusive limited edition cover that's made out of an actual barrel?
That would be dope, right?
Cool. Well, let's dive into the book now, because I don't want to give
Yeah.
away all your secrets today, but there are some things I do want to talk about. So we're going to go over some of the concepts you do talk about in the book. So first off, Marcus, how does barrel aging impact the flavor profile of beer over time? And, what are some of the key discoveries or insights that you highlight in your book that brewers might not be aware of?
Yeah. Barrel aging is fun. There's a lot of different nuances that go into it that I don't think people really understand. Like, again, talking about humidity. So one of the things that I really started to pay attention to was Garrison Brothers and how they aged their whiskey. But then also Andalusia out here as well. And they were putting their whiskey in storage containers. I was like, Jesus, 130 degrees inside this storage container in the summertime. But listening to what their thought process behind that was, of dealing with the heat, extraction of wood, contraction of wood, and how it affects the overall, flavor profiles of this whiskey. Well, what's the difference between beer, right? So no, we don't want our beer getting up to 130 degrees, but letting my beer free rise in the summer in the warehouse, hey, it's not going to hurt it. So I even got into, at certain points, of doing experimentations where I would go ahead, leave the barrels in the warehouse for a couple of months, and then move it into the cooler for a month, and then flash chill it down, let those barrels retract, and then pull it back out and see what those differences were with between this barrel, experiment one, and then experiment two of just leaving this barrel out in the warehouse the entire time. But seeing those flavor profile differences, getting into how it takes some of the heat away, it brings out those flavor profiles of more of the dark fruit, the vanilla, and the caramel, all of those things that people generally will enjoy more than hot whiskey or hot tequila on a beer. So particularly getting into some of those aspects, I think we're going to be important. But generally, a lot of people just think, oh, I'm aging this beer in this particular spirit barrel, and I'm aging for this long to pull these notes from the spirit, not even really thinking about the overall effects of the science behind the wood, where they're thinking, okay, yeah, I could taste the oak, and they think that's all that they're getting from this particular barrel, and it's like, no, there's a ton of flavor that is literally coming from the barrel character. Even if you were just to take oak and age it, just neutral oak, like there's going to be notes that are going to develop over the course of time within this particular beer, because these are the natural flavors that are in this wood, or how it's charred, is a difference, or even how it's maintained and taken care of. All of those play, a role into the overall quality of what you're going to produce with that one, with your particular barrels and how you use them.
Yeah, and barrel aging isn't something new. It goes back for hundreds of years. Can you talk a little bit about the historical significance of barrel aging and brewing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like barrel aging's been around for centuries, right? Long before anyone thought of like using stainless tanks or anything like that. So back then, barrels just kind of weren't used for added flavor. They were kind of more practical container storing and transporting beer. But then brewers started to kind of notice that these barrels, especially ones that held like wine or spirits, were actually changing the beer. Whether it was like the type of wood or whatever was left in the barrel from the previous use, the beer took on like unexpected flavors. So, in wood barrel time, I kind of dig into like how these traditional techniques have made a comeback in modern brewing, and then dive into just a nod of, because I mean, again, like this was supposed to be a quick reader, so you get into like the history of barrel aging. I probably could have spent 3 or 4 chapters just on that, and I might going into the actual hardback copy. But dealing with how it's done today, brewers have kind of embraced that barrel aging not just as a nod to history, but more of adding those particular layers of complexity that you can't achieve with like our modern equipment. And even then, people are getting into now like whiskey extracts and wood extracts and stuff like that, but it's still not the same. So we kind of understand like a lot more what's happening in the barrel now versus back then, so we can be kind of more intentional in what we're going for.
Now let's talk just barrels for a sec. Can you walk us through some of the most common types of barrels and what styles that you found they're good for?
Yeah, well, the first one is going to be bourbon barrels, right? So those are going to be good for your stouts, porters, stronger ales. They're going to give you those rich, bold flavors, the caramel, the dark fruit. You're going to kind of get that booziness from them. I tend to really gravitate towards rye whiskey barrels a little bit more, because you get those nuances, but then you also get the added spice characters. You get the cinnamon, the nutmeg, depending on what you had particularly in there before. You got your wine barrels. So wine barrels are typically more for sours, farmhouse, Belgian beers. They're going to kind of be a little more delicate. So, I mean, I've seen them done with stouts. I mean, I've even done port barrels for stouts. But when you get into like the white wines and kind of like the little lighter red wines, it's hard to pull out like the cherry, plum, blackberry, or like even kind of like the tannic structure that you get from the grapes that were held previously in there before. So I think like using the lighter beers obviously are going to give those particular flavor points a little more prevalence in them. And then I really like saisons in like wine barrels. And then you got your third-party barrel. I like to call them third-party barrels because you don't see them as much in the beer scene, but you know, your tequila, brandy, rum, you know, they're starting to get into a little more of the like fresh oak barrels with sours and stuff like that. Um, I mean, really, when it comes to beer, you could almost use any spirit barrel if you find the right style of beer to go into it. It's just understanding the flavor profile of what spirit was in there before, understanding the flavor profile of what wood you're using, and then finding that balance of age, because you don't want to overage something, you don't want to underage something. There's a fine balance of in between, right? And you want to make sure that you hit those points, because oxidation obviously plays a play, and we'll talk about that more, but oxidation obviously plays a play in the way that barrels are affected. So over the course of time, you go a little too long, and there might be some discrepancies that you really don't care for in that finished product. But when you fine tune that right point, then that's where the magic happens. So even for me, you know, it was more that like we wouldn't even start looking at barrels until about 18 months. And then looking at 22, 24 kind of months where it kind of went more into what we were actually like looking for.
I know you have a growth mindset and are always trying to learn. Have you ever put a certain type of beer in a certain type of barrel and it just didn't work out very well? Or perhaps something that
Yeah,
surprised you the way it played out?
I would say, yeah, the one that I was really surprised about, because something that we're definitely not known for is mixed fermentation. But I've done a couple of mixed fermentation beers with this yeast that I've actually had since like home brewing. And I've been able to like bring it back and do the little things with it. And we've had some fun little farmhouse projects. But the one that was the most delicious for me was we did a foolproof gin barrel. So when we got the gin barrel, it was 160 proof, 161 proof. It was something ridiculous. And when we got the barrel, it still had six gallons of gin in it. So we ended up putting it all in growlers, gave it to staff, but I ended up aging that sour in there for about 3 years, and then used the ingredients to kind of mimic Hawaiian punch. But the way that that gin barrel, the botanicals, the tannins that you got from it, the way that it played with that fruit, it was absolutely fantastic. And I think that surprised me the most because I didn't expect that from a gin barrel. But then I look back and it was like the some of the best sours I've had have actually been in gin barrels. So, you know,
No, that one sounds delicious. Do you have any bottles still laying around anywhere
I have one in my fridge.
for soon or for that special day?
I don't know. I don't drink sours too much anymore. They upset my belly. So it'll probably be like I host dinner parties occasionally. So it'll probably be at one of the dinner parties as one of the pairings or something along those
That
lines.
sounds like the right move. I just think back
Right.
to all those pre-pandemic bottle share like days where you'd have a billion different kinds of barrel aged sour, and someone says,
Man.
"Now it's a good idea to have that sour we've had in the fridge
All
for a very
right. Let's
long
break
time."
it up a little bit.
How did our stomach handle all of this?
Mine can't at all.
We've just become a little smarter and refined our palates, I guess.
Exactly.
So in the book, you covered both the art and the science of barrel aging. How do you balance these two aspects, Marcus, in your writing? And why is it so important for readers to understand both when it comes to making barrel aged beer?
Yeah, because I think they're very too much different things, right? Um, you have the art of it, and when I say art, it's more of your flow and process of it, right? For me, like my art behind, and I was actually having this conversation the other day. I I consider it art because I'm taking something from the ground foundation of something and then bringing it to a consumer to purchase, enjoy, and make it an experience for them. And that's what we think of with art, right? And so when it comes to barrel aging, for me, I'm sourcing specific, like if I brew a particular beer, I'm thinking about, if I know it's going to be barrel aged, I'm thinking about the nuances of the beer itself, right? So going down to the type of grains that I'm using in the beer, because it might be different than if I'm just going with the stout that I'm going to adjunct and not barrel age. I might use very specific grain. I'm going to do extended boils. I'm going to let it sit in the tanks a little bit longer. I'm sourcing very specific barrels for this beer based off of how I've tried it, what experience I got from it after fermentation, and what I think it's going to do in these particular barrels. This particular beer might do better in a rye whiskey barrel than it might do in a bourbon barrel. Or, I might source a single barrel out from somebody and utilize that versus trying to source some mass barrels from one of the cooperages. But then even getting into when you're doing adjuncts, like I'm it you think about so much more than just, all right, I'm gonna throw vanilla and coconut in this beer. No, like there's so many different species and origins of vanilla. I might want marshmallow in this vanilla, so I'm gonna use a Tahitian. I might want it to be more floral and woodsy, so I'm gonna use Mexican. Or, I want my coconut to be more floral and not as in depth on the flavor profile, but play more on the sweetness and the nose. Then I'm going to use toasted coconut. If I want it more in depth for me to be able to taste it throughout the beer, then I'm going to use desiccated coconut. There's so many different nuances that go into the process of me creating these beers that I have deemed that it's not just the process, because obviously if everybody can duplicate what the best are doing in their roles, and everybody would be doing the best, right? But it's not. It's these particular people, these particular individuals have so much thought process and debt into what they're doing that it becomes more than a process, and it becomes a style to them. It becomes art to them. But then, yes, you also have the role of production. You have the role of, this is what the basis of work is for this particular subject. And so, yes, you have that fine tune too. I can definitely write out a SOP for somebody to barrel age a beer, and I'm sure the beer will come out fine. But is it going to go into the additional nuances and effects of this beer that is going to make it sought out? Is it going to have somebody spending $800 on a bottle of BBT or whatever the case may be? Probably not. But if you're able to utilize both steps and both have both aspects to what you're creating, and then your consumer sees and hears that passion in that project of what you're doing, they're going to be more inclined to want to go ahead, seek out, and purchase what you're doing.
Once again, you tie back into that storytelling aspect of it, which I love. So for readers of your book, what are some of the most surprising or lesser known facts about barrel-aged beer that they're going to discover in Beer Barrel in Time?
I think one of the main things that I kind of talk about more than once that people are going to find surprising would be how much oxygen plays a role. So we talk about oxidation, right? Most people think oxygen is a bad thing when it comes to beer, and many times, a lot of times, it is, especially when you're talking about fresh beer. But during the barrel aging process, a small amount of oxygen kind of does seep within the wood character, and then this controlled oxidation kind of mellows out harsh flavors, brings on those deeper flavor points that you're looking for. You get more balance, and it overall affects your barrel aging kind of process. That's kind of like and then I think the other thing is getting into when you get into like sours, but it could even be into some of the darker beers. You have that wine aspects like the terroirs. So it's kind of similar into that effect, because depending on where you're aging, you're going to pull out different effects within these barrels. Again, if I was to put a beer in 2 barrels and put them in separate spaces, one in the warehouse, and said one I put into a cool environment and it never goes over 70 degrees. And I pull those beers at the same time, bottle them at the same time, same process, same everything. Those beers are not going to taste the same, regardless if it's the same base beer that went into there, regardless if it's the same barrels that came from the same cooperage, because those experiences were different where they were. The overall effects of what that beer is going to be when it's finished are going to be completely different.
Have you done that experiment before?
Yes.
So you mentioned getting beers from cooperages. Where have you in the past sourced your barrels from?
A lot of different places. Midwest Barrel, Kentucky Barrel Co. Just hitting up distilleries. So driving down the Garrison Brothers and getting some of their barrels, or driving down to one of the other local places and getting some of their whiskey barrels. My favorite, though, has become single barrels. So partnering with your local bars, your local restaurants, your local bourbon or spirit clubs, and receiving those barrels, because most of the times all they're going to do is turn that barrel on the furniture or leave it in the garage. So hey, say a barrel group, why don't you let me have these barrels? I'll give you 6 bottles or whatever the case may be of this particular beer when it's done, and you can have the barrel back when it's done. What am I going to do with it? So, being able to garnish those kind of collaborations, partnerships, and things like that became a little more meaningful to me than just gravitating and hitting up local cooperages. Although Midwest Barrel is one of my favorites. Midwest Barrel took really good care of me as a brewer when I was at Weathered Souls, and they helped me procure some of the rarest barrels that you could have, for beer. Those Pappy 23-year barrels, the Sazerac 18 barrels, all of those fun things. Like I wouldn't be able to get that from a local spot. So for that benefit, I shout out Midwest Barrel because they're my absolute favorite. But as far as what I really started to enjoy was the nuances of the single barrels, because again, I can get five barrels from this particular group, and they can all be bourbon barrels, but they're all from different spirit companies. And when it's all said and done, this base is going to taste different in every single one of these barrels. And then now I can also make it an education thing by presenting it to the consumer as, hey, now you can start getting into seeing what the different nuances of these barrels bring for each base beer. Because now I can give you a Buffalo Trace single barrel, but then also here is, a Old Forester single barrel. And now we could talk about the nuances and the differences of what this particular beer tastes like with this barrel and what this beer tastes like with this barrel, and how they're different or even close to the same. But we wouldn't have known that unless you're able to differentiate those differences, what you're bringing in through the projects that you're going through.
Just hearing all the stories and everything you've done, I mean, you've just soaked in so much knowledge on barrels. And I'm sure people are always coming up to you asking questions about, your barrel program, things you've done in your life, Marcus. Do you find when it comes to people curious to pick your brain on barrels, is there one question you see more than others, or what's something, you're continually, questioned about?
I think a lot of the times when I get questions, it's more about the treatment afterwards. So ingredients, raw goods, how to process them, things like that. Like another thing I thought about, a brewer that I thoroughly look up to hit me up about a month and a half ago, and he was pulling some stouts out of the barrels. And hey, I have this stout at this ABV, and it was aged in this barrels. What vanilla would you use? What would be the quantity that you would use? How would you process it? And all of these questions. And in my mind, because it's the homie, I just give him the immediate answer. But then it was like, I guess a lot of people don't know this information, and I probably should charge for it. But it's like one of those things where, yeah, it's definitely getting into more of the treatment afterwards. But I think that goes into, yeah, a lot of people don't, they know the flavors that they want to perceive within the beer. They just don't know how to implement those flavors within the beer once it's done.
And a plug for yourself, you did start the Fresh Consulting Company.
I did start Fresh Consulting, so if you do have any of those needs, definitely hit me up. You check out freshconsult.info for more information.
So let's talk a little bit more just about what people don't know about the barrel aging process. Is there an aspect of barrel aging that you believe most brewers don't focus on enough?
I think there's a few. Just like talking about the single barrel program and things like that. I think a huge one is barrel selection and kind of the maintenance. Like while a lot of attention is kind of given to the type of the barrel, the condition of the wood itself is kind of overlooked. Not all barrels are created equal, and there's subtle differences kind of how they're stored, clean, used in the past, or how they have a huge impact on the final beer. For example, the amount of charring or toasting your barrel can significantly influence how flavors like your spice or vanilla or caramel, things like that, can affect it. It can lead to undesirable oxidations or contamination. So I think maintenance is definitely one of those important things that a lot of brewers kind of miss on the crucial scale. Like you go to breweries and people just got their just barrels just sitting on the floor, just aging away until they're kind of like ready to use it type of thing. And it's like, no, sir, like you got to maintenance this. Otherwise, this barrel's not going to work out the way. Like how I remember a friend hit me up like, hey, I got this beer, blah, 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 blah. What do I need to do to hydrate the barrel? And it was like, okay, how long has this barrel been sitting? Oh, it's been here for like 4 months. 4 months? Like, I don't even think you might be able to seal this barrel, but like, come on. So I think like, yeah, the overall barrel maintenance is one, barrel selection is another. Everybody thinks if it's whiskey, it all tastes the same, or if it's bourbon, it all tastes the same. But again, it even goes to the products that are on the shelf. You grab a Buffalo Trace and grab an Eagle Rare. Yeah, they're from the same distillery, but no, they don't taste the same. And so those overall effects are going to go into your beer as well. And so I think people need to have a more appreciation, I think, for the overall barrel selection. And it's not even to say the name on the label. Yes, people look at that, and that's a fantastic selling point to have a rare barrel to, sell that beer. But I think it goes more into the overall flavor aspects of what you're bringing in and how they affect said beer more than anything. And so being able, again, to tell that story is an important thing. Another thing that I think that kind of is underappreciated is barrel reuse. Only use the barrel once. Once is that once and that's it. Unless you're doing a sour project, farmhouse project, whatever the case may be. But if you're doing any extended aging on barrels, that barrel has given you its all by the time that first use is over. You're not going to get the same effects the second time. You can't rehydrate the barrel by putting cheap whiskey in it and moving it around and think you're going to get the same effects. That's not going to work, and it's not how it should work. So I think, overall barrel kind of hygiene and understanding how to get the most out of each barrel the first time is more important than anything.
Now, we've talked a lot of today about just fully understanding what you're getting into when you have a barrel aging program. But for anyone interested in starting a barrel age program up for the first time, do you have any specific advice for them?
Get my book. No, outside of that, I think if you're just starting a barrel program, yes, get some resources. Find you a mentor that is doing incredible things in the barrel age scene and ask a ton of questions, because again, it's not just taking finished product, filling the barrel, throwing it in the corner for a year and then pulling it out and now I have an amazing stout product or amazing barrel aged product. Yes, you're gonna have something palatable that people might like. But there's a lot more passion, art, and kind of process that can go into this particular beer to make it a lot more better and a lot more intimate experience for your consumer base.
Awesome. Good advice there. We have the link for the book in the description and in the chat. So I highly recommend it. I'm enjoying it right now. But Marcus, you brewed a ton of barrel-aged beers in your career. Are there any that you're more proud of than others, or is that one that just stands out? And if so, I'd love to hear why.
I would probably say the barrel-aged art of pastry would have probably been my favorite. And why the name pastry is in it, the beer is not overly sweet. And one of the things that I got to late in my career of barrel aging was getting out of sweet beer. That is one thing that I thoroughly started to not enjoy when trying a lot of different barrel aged products, is people were trying to get the beer so thick or trying to get the ABV so high that the beer was not fully attenuating, and you would have a sweet mess. And then you're adding sweet ingredients and it's even sweeter mess. And I couldn't take it anymore. And so even though we never had anything that was like super cloying, obviously, you got to practice what you preach. And so I very much got out of trying to create beers that were sweet. It was more so about the word balance when it came to the beers. And it was about, if I take a barrel aged beer and I add six ingredients to it, I expect my consumer to be able to taste the barrel aged product, taste the wood that it's been in, but then also be able to taste every ingredient that is listed on that bottle. Because if you cannot taste every ingredient that is listed on that bottle, guess what, brewer? That beer is not done correctly. So, being said that, dealing with the art of pastry, it was one of those beers where it was a rare barrel, but then it was hazelnut, toasted coconut, desiccated coconut, vanilla, and I think I'm missing an ingredient, some nibs or something along those lines. But, and I've done this experiment where I've given this person, or given, individual beer, and we're just going to name an ingredient. Taste the beer, and we'll name one of the ingredients. And then tell me if you can taste that. And you were able to differentiate every single one of those ingredients, and they were still prevalent. That's the important thing. Like, it wasn't like, oh, you got to search for it. Oh, can I get it on the back end? No. You smell it. You smell hazelnut. You smell the barrel. You smell coconut. You smell chocolate. You smell vanilla. You smell all of these aspects of the beer. You try it. You hit all of those aspects of the beer. And so I think once you're kind of like in your bag at that point where you can create those type of balances with your finished product, those are the things to be proud of. And so very much, I would say probably within the last 5 years or so, that's probably been my favorite barrel aged product that I've been a part of.
No, that sounds delicious. And I love how you focus on every aspect of the beer you want the person enjoying it to be able to appreciate. That's truly something cool. So you've done a lot of really cool things in your career, and I'm excited for this book. I encourage everyone listening to check it out. Once again, we've got the link below. But you're quite active on social media, and a couple of things that I've seen mentioned, maybe rumors, maybe true, I don't know. But you've talked about a mention of a TV show, perhaps, or a taproom lounge fried chicken concept. Where's Marcus Baskerville going, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, again, obviously still looking for a job, but trying to stay busy in between. So yes, a TV show, I can't say who yet. TV show reached out, and it was crazy because they reached out a year ago and I hadn't heard back. And I remember I was talking to my mom and I was like, man, I wish that TV show would have worked out. That would have been fun. But essentially it's like a version of Chef Table, but for beverage industry. And so I'm happy to be a part of that. I'll be one of the first little episodes that drop. Start filming hopefully by the end of the year, and so that should be fun. But like we were talking about before the show, I heavily still want to be in the brewing industry. I think I have a little PTSD as far as producing beer at this point, just with the overall way things ended up finishing out with Weathered Souls. But outside of that, I very much still want to be involved in beer, still be a voice within beer. Shit, if somebody had a barrel age program they wanted to run, I'd be happy to do that. But um, one of the things that I thoroughly see the industry is shifting. And honestly, like for me, um, mind you, it's hard because I'm pulled and gravitated two different ways, right? Because right now I am the president of the Black Brewers Association, and my overall job with them is to promote and gain more Black ownership within beer. And so, it's to help these individuals open breweries, help them get started, help all of that. But then for myself, I don't want to open another brewery right now. I'm not saying not ever, but definitely not now with the way that the industry is going. And I think there needs to be a very much grasp on what the craft beer industry is going to be because we don't know. And I mean, even the governance that be of the BA don't know. They've been working on a definition for the craft beer for what, 2 or 3 years now, and haven't even finished that out. And so, it's not because of them; it's because this industry is continually ever evolving, and there's not a definitive answer of where we're going yet. And so I think once we get into kind of that space, I might look into opening another brewery. But one of the things that I've always wanted to do, even outside of the brewery, like I was telling you, I always dream of bigger, right? So even if I had the brewery still, I would still want to do other projects and still do other things. Like, why do I have to be limited to one subject? Even looking at opening a hospitality group, if that's something that works out. But what I particularly want is a tap room with a speakeasy and a fine fried chicken concept. And Aaron Gore has challenged me that I don't have the best fried chicken. And I thoroughly believe, and multiple people have told me that I do. Matter of fact, I had to have this conversation the other day. One of my daughters had a birthday party with one of her best friends. And I was talking to the parents, and we were like, we haven't had you guys over in a couple months. We got to have you over soon. And the wife was like, yeah, definitely. But you let me know when you're frying some chicken again. And it was like, man, I can't even get my kids' friends to come over unless I'm making some chicken or something. Even my sister's the same way. Oh, what are you making on Sunday? And if it's not what she wants to hear, then she's not coming over. And mind you, I don't want to be in the kitchen either. Having somebody produce the recipe that I've created would be great. But I want a tap room with a cocktail lounge concept and fried chicken to serve within there. And so I have received that LOI for a particular place in downtown San Antonio. I haven't signed it yet, as I don't know if that's particular. I don't know if that's the final destination, right? But I did sell them on the concept by bringing them the plate. So fried chicken, mac and cheese, greens, made biscuits from scratch, brought them that. And they're like, we've never had a meeting like this, nor have we had food like this. And so the overall thing would probably get that off the ground. And then we'll see from there.
Okay, last
So we're
question.
looking. Yeah.
You described that delicious plate. Now I'm super hungry. What's the beer you're going to pair it with? If I show up and put it on your side, tell me what I need to drink right now. What's in front of me?
I'm always going to choose an IPA with some fried chicken. That's my personal favorite. And if it's not an IPA, then it's going to be a Hoppy Pills. Now, that would kind of just depend on what I have access to in Texas at that time. As you know, we have some different distribution here, but it would definitely be a West Coast IPA.
Well, I can't wait to visit once it's open. I can't wait to follow what you do next. And for Marcus, anyone interested in checking the book out or getting a hold of you, how can they do so?
Yeah. Email is marcus@freshbeer.co. And then obviously social media, like a lot of people do. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You can holler at me that way as well.
Awesome. Marcus, has been great catching up today. I look forward to seeing you in person soon. Excited to see what you do next. Cheers, my friend.
Cheers, bro. Thank you.